So, what exactly made this night so telling? Today, the Russians targeted Kyiv, which made it possible to observe everything from start to finish, record it all, establish statistics, compare them with the official numbers, and be horrified. Am I saying that right? So, what happened during the day, right?
Yes. So, over the past month, June has actually become a turning point because a qualitative shift has begun towards a completely different kind of war, one that's taking on a total character. Why total? Because, well, it's kind of spreading over more and more territory. It's reaching into more and more areas, and, accordingly, the number of people it affects is also increasing. And the statistics show that, for example, in June, 10% of all strike drones launched during the war were used in that month alone, which means there's been a dramatic increase in the use of combat drones. So if before, when 20, 30, or 50 drones hit Kyiv, that was considered a lot. And it was rare for a drone to even reach the center of Kyiv. It was almost like
the old Soviets saying a bird only making it halfway across the Dnipro.
Only halfway across the Dnipro, too.
Yeah, only halfway across the Dnipro as well.
Right. But, starting in the spring, the number of drones began to increase sharply, almost exponentially. And today, about 550 drones took part in the attack. So, our guy Magyar, who everyone knows, said that the number of drones will soon reach 1,000 per day. And, well, basically, we've also talked about this many times on air, that the Russians are ramping up production, all those factories in Yelabuga and so on. All of this is being done for a reason. And, accordingly, the attacks will become more and more serious and more destructive, because the Russians aren't just using more drones, they're using drones with different explosive components and different tactics. For example, a week or two ago, there was a story like this on our social media. So, the guys from the Ukrainian armed forces showed how one of the drones was packed with a substance that ignited very easily and burned for about 10 minutes. So, this drone was completely filled with that substance. And, essentially, its purpose was to set the target on fire. And right after that drone, another drone arrives carrying this thermobaric charge and creates a volumetric explosion. So when the first drone comes in, and then a couple of minutes later the second one follows, the result is just an incredibly powerful destructive effect. And within a radius of 50 to 60 meters, everything just basically collapses, right? So, we can state that as of today, if we keep fighting this war the way we are now, at this level of organization, we'll just be systematically wiped out over the next year, and that's exactly what will happen under these conditions. Well, with this kind of.
Well, tell us what you calculated. Say it.
Yeah. I'll explain now why, what I'm basing this on, okay? Well, a lot of people know that I've been into aviation history since I was a kid. And I remembered the fate of London during World War II. So I decided to calculate what level of destruction Kyiv might face if a comparable amount of explosives were used against it, right? And to do that, I needed to find out how much was used on London. That's it. And here's what I found. So, during the Blitz in 1940 to 1941, during the Battle of Britain, 12 metric tons of bombs, 12,000 metric tons of bombs, were dropped on London from September 1940 to May 1941. In November 1940, the Luftwaffe dropped 12,400 long tons in just 2 months. So, the V-1 rockets were used 9,251 times in 1944 to 1945. Most of them were aimed at London. This number refers to attacks on the whole of Great Britain, but most were targeted at London, since it was such a large target with a big area. 2,515 reached the city, killing 6,184 civilians and injuring 17,981. In 1944 to 1945, 517 V-2 rockets were also launched. This was the first fully operational ballistic missile. So, 517 rockets hit London, and another 537 hit other counties. In short, over the course of the war, 30,000 civilians were killed in the UK overall, and in London, 18,688 were killed, which amounted to 0.23% of the population. I asked myself, what would happen if Russia started using shahids with increasing intensity? How much time would it take to reach that level of destruction? Exclusively with shahids. I'm not talking about cruise missiles, I'm not talking about Iskandars, although to some extent.
Ballistic missiles, yes.
Yes, and about ballistics, kind of, yes. Although Iskandar is a ballistic missile, after all. So, there were such calculations. In London, 1 million damaged and destroyed houses, but you have to keep in mind that a very large number of them were just small houses, shacks, and so on. The working-class districts of London suffered very seriously. That's why in Kyiv, in this regard, it's more compact, and as we know, a lot of residents live in apartment buildings. There are about 10,500 of them, I think. So, the calculation was that each drone carries 90 kilograms of explosives. So, we know that they've been upgraded from 50 kilograms to 90, and now they fly higher and almost twice as fast. Because if before it used to fly at 150 kilometers per hour, now these drones fly at 240, and they fly at an altitude of about 3 kilometers, and sometimes even higher. So, to achieve a similar level of destruction in Kyiv, it would take approximately 162,687 Shahid drones. The time equivalence, 446 drones per day for a year, 5,423 drones in a month, or 23,241 drones in a single week. Of course, it's important to understand here that there are.
Kyiv isn't hit every day.
Kyiv isn't hit every day. Then we reduce the effectiveness, meaning, let's say, out of 1,000 drones, only, for example, 10% will.
But the selectivity is higher in the sense that the targeting and strike tracking are better.
So, basically, you can play it either way. But, indeed, Sergei Arkadyevich is right that, unlike the carpet bombings that were used during World War II, today's accuracy is much higher. And moreover, the explosives are more powerful, the substances themselves are, you could say, stronger. That's why the TNT equivalent, let's say, during World War II, it had different destructive capabilities. Right. Plus, the density of buildings varies. But I talked to some people who really know this subject, and they said that these calculations should actually be even more pessimistic. And accordingly, these plans from developers about how you should urgently buy property in Kyiv because prices will only go up, as well as the approach of our authorities, like the Kyiv city administration posting that 23,000 Kyiv residents spent the night in the metro today. And at the same time, they post a cheerful report about how a road has been built here with, so to speak, barrier-free features for people with disabilities. And look at us, how great we are. All of this is, frankly, pure madness under these circumstances, because if we maintain the same level of organization that we have right now, Kyiv will be significantly destroyed within the next year.